The envelope sat on my kitchen counter like a ticking bomb. Cream-colored, expensive stock with flowing calligraphy that spelled out my name, Elias Carver. I'd been staring at it for 20 minutes, coffee gone cold in my hands, as rain drummed against the windows of my Portland apartment. Outside, the city was a blur of gray, fitting for a Tuesday in March that already felt like the longest day of my life. I didn't need to open it to know what was inside. Lila had called yesterday, her voice a studied performance of casual excitement, as if what she was about to tell me wasn't designed to shatter what remained of my composure. "Just wanted to make sure you got the invitation, Eli," she'd said. "I know it might be awkward, but you're my brother." Awkward. Such a bloodless word for this particular betrayal. I finally set down my mug and picked up the envelope, turning it over in my hands. The paper was thick, expensive, Theo's taste, not my sister's. Theo Grayson. The name alone triggered a spasm in my jaw. I tore open the envelope with deliberate slowness, as if extending the moment could somehow change what was inside. The invitation was exactly as I'd imagined. Understated elegance announcing the forthcoming marriage of Lila Marie Carver and Theodore James Grayson. 6 weeks from now. At the Forest View Lodge. My fingers trembled slightly. Not from shock, but from a cold, clarifying rage that had been building since Lila's call. Theodore James Grayson, the same man who had been sleeping with my wife. Twice. The same man who had looked me in the eye at company functions, shaken my hand, asked about my projects. All while he was destroying my marriage from the inside out. And now he would be my brother-in-law. I poured the cold coffee down the sink and watched it circle the drain. Just 3 months ago I had signed the divorce papers, ending 5 years of marriage to Maris. 5 years I had believed were built on mutual respect and love, until I found the messages. The first time I had forgiven her. Everyone makes mistakes, I told myself. We can rebuild. I was such a goddamn fool. The second time wasn't really a discovery. More of a confirmation of what I already suspected from the late-night calls, the sudden work emergencies, the growing distance. When confronted, Maris didn't even try to deny it. "I'm sorry, Elias," she'd said, her voice flat. "I tried, but this isn't working." As if our marriage had been a faulty appliance. I crossed to my home office and unlocked the bottom drawer of my desk. Inside was a folder containing what remained of my marriage, divorce papers, a few photographs I couldn't bring myself to destroy, and printouts of emails I'd found on Maris's laptop before she moved out. I hadn't looked at them since the divorce was finalized, but now I spread them across the desk, scanning for mentions of Theo. There were dozens. I had been so focused on the explicit messages that I hadn't paid attention to the others. Business discussions, schedule coordination, complaints about me. They stretched back further than I had realized. One email from 14 months ago caught my eye. T.E. doesn't suspect anything about the Richardson project. He's too trusting, always has been. We should move forward as planned. M calling tomorrow to confirm details. I stared at the message, reading it again and again. The Richardson project had been one of my firm's biggest commissions last year, a sustainable high-rise downtown. Maris had no connection to it professionally. She worked in financial consulting, not architecture. And who was M? My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Did you get Lila's invitation? Please don't make a scene about this, Elias. It's been months. Time to move on." Typical. My mother had always taken Lila's side, even when we were children. When I told my parents about Maris's affair, my mother had somehow turned it around on me. "Perhaps if you'd been more attentive. You're always so wrapped up in your work." As if I had engineered my own betrayal. I didn't respond to the text. Instead, I returned to the emails, now scanning with new purpose. This wasn't just about the affair anymore. The mention of the Richardson project suggested something else, something that touched my professional life. The rain intensified, pelting against the windows as thunder rumbled in the distance. Portland in March was always dreary, but today the weather felt personal, a reflection of the storm building inside me. I had forgiven once. I had walked away with dignity the second time. I had even started to heal, focusing on my work and slowly rebuilding my life. But this wedding invitation changed everything. It wasn't just that Theo was marrying my sister, though that alone was a betrayal that cut deep. It was the gradual realization that what I had interpreted as a simple affair might be something more calculated, more far-reaching. I picked up the invitation again, studying the elegant script. 6 weeks until the wedding. 6 weeks to untangle whatever web Maris, Theo, and apparently my own sister had been weaving around me. My phone buzzed again. "A colleague from the firm, you okay? Haven't seen you at the office today." I hesitated before typing back. Research day. Working from home. By the way, do you still have the Richardson files? The response came quickly. Most are archived. What? Just tying up loose ends, I replied. I returned the divorce papers to the drawer but kept the emails on my desk. Then I took the wedding invitation and pinned it to my office wall, right above my computer. A reminder of what I was facing. The old Elias, trusting, forgiving, naive, had died the day he signed those divorce papers. The man who remained was different. Colder, more analytical, and now, with this invitation sitting in front of him, filled with a purpose that felt almost like clarity. I opened my laptop and began to search for everything I could find on Theodore James Grayson. It was time to understand exactly who my sister was marrying, and what he and my ex-wife had been planning behind my back all this time. As I typed, I noticed an unread email that had arrived last night from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read simply, "About Maris and Dio." My finger hovered over the mouse. Outside, lightning flashed, illuminating my apartment for one stark moment before plunging it back into gray shadow. I clicked. The anonymous email contained only 3 words, "Check the blueprints." No signature, no context, just those cryptic instructions hovering on my screen as thunder cracked outside. I tried tracing the sender, but the address led nowhere. A temporary account, already deleted. I closed my laptop, mind racing. The Richardson Project blueprints were stored at the firm, and despite being the lead architect, even I would need clearance to access them after completion. Whatever was hidden there would have to wait until morning. That night, sleep eluded me. Rain lashed against my bedroom window as I stared at the ceiling, memories of 6 months ago flooding back. The day I filed for divorce. It had been raining then too. A cold January downpour that soaked through my coat as I climbed the courthouse steps, manila envelope clutched in my hand. Inside was the dissolution of 5 years, reduced to legal jargon and signature lines. I remembered Maris's face when I confronted her the second time. No tears, no desperate apologies like the first betrayal. Just a cool detachment that made me wonder if she'd ever loved me at all. "It wasn't planned, Elias," she'd said, standing in our kitchen, the kitchen I designed for her when we bought the house. "These things happen. These things happen." As if adultery were a weather pattern, something beyond human control. I'd found the text messages while charging her phone. She'd grown careless, or perhaps she wanted to be caught. Dozens of exchanges with Theo, planning meetings around my work schedule. And worse, casual dissections of my personality, my habits, my weaknesses. "He's so oblivious," she'd written. Too wrapped up in his precious buildings to notice what's right in front of him. In my bedroom I sat up, switched on the lamp. Sleep was impossible now. I padded to the closet and reached for the small safe tucked in the back corner. The combination, Maris's birthday, now felt like another betrayal. Inside was my grandfather's pocket watch, the only thing of value he'd left behind when he died. He'd given it to me when I graduated architecture school. "Time is the true test of what we build, Eli," he'd said. "Make something that lasts." I thought my marriage would last. Another failure of imagination. The watch was elegant. Silver case, Roman numerals, a small crack in the crystal from when my grandfather had fallen off a ladder in his 70s. He'd refused to repair it, claiming it gave the watch character. "Perfect things are suspicious," he'd often said. My marriage had seemed perfect once. I clutched the watch, feeling its weight in my palm as the memory crashed over me. The day I filed for divorce, I'd returned home, soaked and numb. The house, our house, was empty. Maris already moved out while I was at the courthouse. A coward's exit. I'd stood dripping on the hardwood floors, surrounded by half-empty shelves and phantom outlines where her photographs had hung. In my pocket, the watch ticked steadily, unchanging while my world collapsed. And then something inside me snapped. I pulled out the watch and hurled it against the wall with all the force of my betrayal. It hit with a satisfying crack, crystal shattering, gears scattering across the floor like my broken trust. I spent 3 hours on my hands and knees, collecting tiny shards and bent mechanisms, sobbing for the first time since discovering Maris's infidelity. Not for her, for the watch, for my grandfather, for the man I'd been before. Now, in my apartment, I opened my palm and studied the reassembled timepiece. I'd taken it to 4 different jewelers before finding one who could restore it. It worked again, but new scratches marked the case, a dent marred one edge, and the replacement crystal didn't quite match the original. Like me, functioning but altered. A plan began forming in my mind. First, the blueprints. Then Theodore James Grayson. I needed to understand what I was facing. Dawn broke gray and hesitant as I showered and dressed. By 7 I was in my car heading downtown toward the firm's offices. Traffic was light, most of Portland still asleep or huddled against the persistent rain. At a red light I checked my phone. 3 missed calls from Lila and a text. "We need to talk about the wedding, Eli. Please." I silenced my phone and continued driving. The office was quiet when I arrived, just the weekend security guard and a few early associates. I nodded greetings, projecting casual normalcy while my heart hammered. My office was unchanged, drawing table by the window, scale models on shelves, awards I no longer cared about mounted on walls. I logged into the system and requested access to the Richardson archives, citing quality control concerns. 20 minutes later, my phone pinged with approval. As I walked toward the records room, Julian from the design team emerged from the break room, coffee in hand. "Elias, thought you were working from home today." "Change of plans?" I said, forcing a smile. Julian hesitated, then lowered his voice. "Heard about your sister's engagement. Rough break, man. Isn't that the same guy who—" "Yes, I cut him off." "It is." "Christ." Julian shook his head. "Some people have no shame. You know, I always thought there was something off about Grayson. Way too interested in our client list for a developer's consultant." I froze. "What do you mean?" "Oh, at the holiday party last year. He cornered me, asking about upcoming projects, especially municipal contracts. Seemed to know a lot about our bids before they were public." Julian shrugged. "Thought it was strange at the time." My mouth went dry. "Did you mention this to anyone?" "To who?" "He's tight with Matthews." "Matthews RCO. Anyway, water under the bridge now, right?" I nodded absently as Julian clapped my shoulder and continued down the hall. In the records room, I pulled the Richardson files, heart pounding with anticipation and dread. Whatever was hidden here had been worth destroying my marriage to conceal. As I spread the blueprints across the table, my phone vibrated with an incoming call. A known number. I answered. "Stop digging, Carver," said a voice I didn't recognize. "Some things should stay buried." The line went dead. The threatening call left me cold but more determined than ever. I photographed the Richardson blueprints with my phone, focusing on the sections that had been revised multiple times. Something wasn't right. The structural supports in the east wing had been modified from my original designs, the changes subtle but significant. Whoever made these alterations knew exactly what they were doing. By 9, the office was filling with Monday energy, conversations about weekend plans, coffee machines gurgling, the soft ping of elevators arriving. I slipped the blueprints back into their folder and returned them to archives, mind churning over this new information. Outside, the rain had intensified, sheets of water cascading down the glass walls of our building. I texted my assistant that I'd be out for the day, then headed to the parking garage. I had a new destination in mind, Theo Grayson's office across town. Portland traffic crawled through the downpour, wipers barely keeping up with the deluge. I used the time to make a call to an old college friend who now worked in records at the city planning department. "Sam? It's Elias Carver. I need a favor." Sam and I had been close once before careers and marriages pulled us in different directions. She sounded surprised but pleased to hear from me. "Eli. God, it's been what, 2 years? At least. Listen, I'm looking into the Richardson building permits. Were there any last-minute revisions filed before construction?" Pause. "That's oddly specific. Everything okay?" "Just tying up loose ends," I said, the lie coming easily now. "Potential liability issue. I'd have to look. Call you back. Please. Today if possible." As I navigated toward the Pearl District where Theo kept his consulting offices, memories of my sister Lila flooded back. 3 years younger than me, she'd always burned with a fierce competitiveness I never fully understood. Our childhood had been comfortable, our parents showing no obvious favoritism, yet Lila behaved as though she was constantly fighting for scraps of attention. When I married Maris, Lila had seemed genuinely happy for me. She and Maris became close, shopping trips, wine nights, weekend brunches. I'd been grateful then, believing their friendship would help cement Maris's place in our family. Now I wondered if that friendship had been the first betrayal. I found a parking spot 2 blocks from Theo's building and sat watching the entrance through the rain-streaked windshield. My phone buzzed with Sam's response. A PDF of permit revisions for the Richardson project, submitted 3 days before construction began. The authorizing signature was from someone I'd never heard of, but the timestamp coincided with a conference I'd attended in Chicago. I'd been conveniently out of town. At 11:45, Theo emerged from the building, tall and confident in a tailored overcoat, apparently unconcerned by the rain. I slid lower in my seat as he hailed a rideshare. When the car pulled away, I followed at a careful distance. Theo's destination was a small bistro in the Northwest District, the kind of place that served $20 sandwiches and craft cocktails at lunch. Through the restaurant's wide windows, I watched him take a corner table, checking his watch with the impatient air of someone expecting company. 10 minutes later, my stomach clenched as a familiar figure approached his table. Lila. My sister looked different somehow, more polished, her dark hair shorter than when I'd last seen her. She bent to kiss Theo before sitting, not the perfunctory greeting of an engaged couple, but something hungrier, more possessive. I raised my phone and took several photos, feeling simultaneously creepy and justified. As I watched, they ordered, their conversation animated. Lila laughed at something Theo said, then leaned forward, her expression growing serious. Theo shook his head, seeming to disagree. Their body language suggested an argument brewing. I thought of our childhood, of Lila following me around our backyard in Connecticut, wanting to join every game, demanding to be included in every activity. I remembered her tears when I left for college, her resentment when I moved to Portland for my first job, her palpable relief when she secured a position at a local gallery 2 years later. Always in my shadow, always striving to catch up. Now she was marrying the man who'd helped destroy my marriage. Coincidence seemed increasingly unlikely. My phone rang. Sam again. Eli, I found something weird. Those permit revisions? They were logged by a shell company that doesn't exist anymore. And get this, the building inspector who signed off on the changes was fired 3 months later for taking bribes. Bribes from whom? That's the thing, the case was sealed. But rumor was it involved several major projects, including Richardson. I thanked her and hung up, attention returning to the restaurant where Theo was now standing, throwing cash on the table. Something had clearly upset him. Lila reached for his arm, but he shook her off, striding toward the exit. I ducked down as he emerged onto the sidewalk, rain plastering his expensive haircut to his forehead. He stalked past my car without a glance, pulling out his phone. Lila remained at the table, staring into her wine glass. Even from a distance, I could see the mixture of anger and hurt on her face. Then she gathered her things and headed for the door. I had a choice, follow Theo or confront my sister. Before I could decide, my phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. Meet me at the family cabin. 3 p.m. Come alone. Oh. As I looked up from the message, Lila was staring directly at my car, her eyes locking with mine through the rain-streaked glass. She held my gaze for a long moment, then deliberately turned and walked away. She had known I was watching all along. The family cabin sat 40 miles outside Portland, nestled among towering pines that swayed and groaned in the persistent wind. By the time I arrived, the rain had softened to a misty drizzle that clung to everything. The trees, the moss-covered roof, my coat as I stepped from the car. My father had built this place in the 90s, a weekend project that stretched over 3 summers. As children, Lila and I had spent countless weekends here, fishing in the nearby stream, playing elaborate games of make-believe in the surrounding woods. It had been our refuge, our shared secret kingdom. I hadn't been back in 2 years. Lila's sleek black Audi was already parked in the gravel driveway. I checked my watch, 2:45. I was early, but so was she. The cabin door creaked as I pushed it open, the familiar smell of pine and wood smoke washing over me. Inside, a fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting dancing shadows across the knotty pine walls. Lila stood by the window, silhouetted against the gray afternoon light. You followed us, she said without turning. Not a question. You knew I would. I remained by the door, suddenly uncertain. The sister I knew, or thought I knew, felt like a stranger now. Why him, Lila? Of all people. She turned then, her face composed but her eyes betraying a storm of emotions. It's complicated. Enlighten me. I moved further into the room, keeping the worn leather sofa between us. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like a deliberate choice to hurt me. Lila sighed, running a hand through her short hair. Not everything is about you, Eli. Theo and I, it just happened. Like his affair with my wife, just happened? Twice. Anger surged through me. Don't insult my intelligence. Nothing just happens with Theodore Grayson. He calculates every move. You don't know him like I do. Clearly. I laughed bitterly. I thought he was a professional colleague. You and Maris apparently knew him much more intimately. Lila flinched at Maris's name. I never meant to hurt you. When Theo and I started seeing each other. When exactly was that? Before or after I filed for divorce? Her silence was answer enough. Jesus, Lila. I sank onto the sofa, suddenly exhausted. What happened to you? To us. Us. Her laugh was sharp, brittle. There hasn't been an us since you left for college, Eli. You went off to become the golden child, the successful architect. I stayed behind, always the afterthought. That's not fair. Isn't it? Mom and Dad funded your education, your first apartment. When I wanted to attend art school? Too impractical, Lila. Choose something sensible. Even when I followed you to Portland, you were too busy with your perfect life and perfect wife to notice me struggling. Old resentments, long buried, surfaced in her voice. I stared at her, trying to reconcile this bitter woman with the sister I'd grown up with. Is that what this is about? Revenge for some perceived childhood slight. I stood, pacing before the fire. You're marrying a man who helped destroy my marriage because you're jealous? Don't be melodramatic. Lila crossed to the kitchen area, pouring herself a glass of water with trembling hands. Theo cares about me. He made a mistake with Maris. Twice, I reminded her. People change. Or they just get better at hiding who they really are. I pulled out my phone, bringing up the photos I'd taken of the blueprint revisions. Did you know about the Richardson project? She frowned. Theo mentioned your firm built it. What about it? Someone altered my designs, compromised the structural integrity, and bribed a building inspector to approve it. Right around the time Maris and Theo were seeing each other. Lila's face paled. You can't think Theo would? I found emails, Lila. Maris and Theo discussing the Richardson project. Planning something behind my back. I moved closer, showing her the photos. And now I discover permit revisions submitted while I was conveniently out of town, approved by an inspector later fired for taking bribes. She stared at the images, her composure cracking. I don't understand what you're saying. I'm saying your fiancé isn't just a homewrecker. He's involved in something illegal, possibly dangerous. I softened my tone, seeing genuine confusion in her eyes. And I think you're being used. Lila shook her head vehemently. You're wrong. Theo loves me. Like he loved Maris? The words came out harsher than intended. She slapped me, the crack of it echoing in the cabin's close quarters. You don't know anything about it. About us. I touched my stinging cheek, a strange calm settling over me. I know enough. Whatever's happening, you're in over your head, Lila. Get out. Her voice was low, dangerous. Now. I'm trying to protect you. I don't need your protection. She laughed, the sound all wrong. I never did. As I turned to leave, she called after me. Stay away from the wedding, Eli. Stay away from Theo. Whatever you think you know, let it go before someone gets hurt. I paused at the door, rain misting my face. Is that a threat? A warning. Her eyes were wide, suddenly vulnerable. Please, Eli. For once in your life, stop trying to fix everything. I studied my sister, the tension in her shoulders, the fear beneath her anger. Something wasn't right. What aren't you telling me, Lila? For a moment I thought she might break, might tell me everything. Then her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, and whatever moment of weakness I'd glimpsed vanished. Goodbye, Eli. As I drove back toward Portland, the rain intensified, drumming on the roof of my car like urgent fingers. My cheek still stung from Lila's slap, but it was her fear that haunted me most. My phone rang, Sam again. Eli? I found something else. Something big. About Theo Grayson. Lightning split the darkening sky as I pulled over to take the call, unaware that I was being followed. Theo Grayson isn't his real name, Sam's voice crackled through the speaker as rain hammered my windshield. He was born Theodore Graves. Changed it 15 years ago after a scandal in Boston. Lightning illuminated the forested roadside in stark white flashes. I pulled the car further onto the shoulder, cutting the engine. What kind of scandal? Construction fraud. The triumph in Sam's voice was palpable. He was a project manager for a firm that collapsed after using substandard materials in 3 condo developments. One building partially collapsed, injured 7 people. Graves was never formally charged, insufficient evidence, but his reputation was destroyed. My mind raced, connecting dots. And now he's here working the same scheme. Looks that way. After Boston, he spent time in Chicago, then Seattle, always as a consultant to architecture firms and developers. Always walking away before problems surfaced. You're amazing, Sam. How did you find all this? She laughed. I have friends in records departments across the country. Plus, his Boston mugshot shows the same scar along his left eyebrow. Just had to connect the dots. After promising Sam dinner as thanks, I ended the call and sat watching raindrops race down my windshield, each one distorting the world beyond. Theo had used Maris to access my firm, my designs. But why target me specifically? What made the Richardson project worth destroying my marriage? Headlights approached from behind, slowing as they neared my parked car. I tensed, watching in the rearview mirror as a black SUV pulled in behind me. For one paranoid moment, I expected Theo or some unknown threat. Instead, my mother emerged, hurrying through the rain with a collapsible umbrella. I rolled down my window as she approached. "Mom? What are you doing here?" "Following you." She didn't bother with pleasantries. "Get out of the car, Elias. We need to talk, and I'm not doing it in this downpour." Bewildered, I followed her to her SUV, sliding into the passenger seat as she shook water from her umbrella. At 62, Faye Carver remained formidable. Silver hair in a perfect bob-tailored blazer, the same penetrating gaze that had intimidated me throughout childhood. Lila called. "She's upset." My mother's tone was accusatory. "Said you're harassing her and Theo with wild accusations." Of course Lila had called her. She always had. "They're not wild accusations. Theo Grayson is a fraud, Mom. His real name is Theodore Graves. He was involved in a construction scandal in Boston that injured people." My mother's expression didn't change. People reinvent themselves. Make mistakes. Move on. This isn't about reinvention. He's running the same scheme here, using substandard materials, bribing inspectors. And somehow he used Maris to access my designs. Always so dramatic, Elias. She sighed, checking her immaculate manicure. "Not everything is a conspiracy against you. I have evidence. What you have is bitterness over your failed marriage. You're embarrassing yourself." She turned to face me fully. "Let it go. Lila is happy. Don't ruin this for her because you can't move on." I stared at my mother, a terrible suspicion forming. "You knew, didn't you? About Maris and Theo." "Before I found out." The slight stiffening of her shoulders confirmed it. "Jesus Christ." I laughed incredulously. My own mother knew my wife was cheating and said nothing. "It wasn't my place to interfere," she replied stiffly. "Interfere? It's called protecting your son." "From what? A marriage that was already failing?" "Maris was unhappy for years, Elias. You were just too absorbed in your career to notice." Her words cut deeper than I wanted to admit. "So that justifies betrayal? Infidelity? Fraud?" "I'm saying people make choices for complex reasons." She reached for her purse, extracting a silver compact to check her reflection. "Maris made hers. Lila has made hers. It's time you accepted that and moved on." "Like you've moved on? After what, 4 decades in a loveless marriage to Dad?" The compact snapped shut. "Your father and I have an arrangement that works for us." "An arrangement," I repeated. "Is that what marriage means to this family? Convenient arrangements and looking the other way when it suits you?" My mother's eyes flashed. "Don't presume to judge what you don't understand, Elias. Family is complicated." "Apparently so." I reached for the door handle, then paused. "One more thing. Did Dad invest in the Richardson project?" The question clearly caught her off guard. "What?" "Simple question, Mom. Did he invest?" Her hesitation told me everything. "He may have made a small investment. On Theo's recommendation." "How small?" She looked away. 200,000. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. "So when the building eventually fails, and it will, Dad's investment is protected because he can claim he was defrauded. Meanwhile, the insurance pays out and everyone walks away richer. Except the people who might get hurt when substandard materials fail." "That's absurd." But her protest lacked conviction. "Is it? I wonder what the SEC would think. Or the insurance investigators." My mother's face hardened. "You wouldn't dare. That's your father's retirement you're threatening. And those are people's lives you're gambling with." I exploded. My reputation. My career. All sacrificed for what? Profit? Revenge because I dared to leave the family business for architecture? Don't be melodramatic. "I'm going to stop this, Mom. Whatever it takes." She grabbed my arm as I moved to exit. "Think carefully, Elias. Family stands together." I looked at her manicured hand on my sleeve, then up at her face, the face I'd trusted unconditionally for 38 years. "That's exactly what I'm doing," I said quietly, pulling away. "Standing for what's right. Even against family." Rain soaked through my coat as I returned to my car. In the rearview mirror, I watched my mother sit motionless in her SUV, phone already at her ear. I started the engine, a strange calm settling over me. Now I knew exactly what I was facing. And who? No more illusions about family loyalty or love's boundaries. As I pulled onto the highway, my phone chimed with a new text. A photo of a familiar document, the Richardson blueprint, with a time and address scrawled across it. Tomorrow. No. Come alone. The message came from an unknown number. But this time I knew exactly who it was from. I spent the night in my apartment reviewing everything I'd discovered. Sleep was impossible, my mind racing with betrayals layered upon betrayals. By morning I'd connected most of the dots. Theo had targeted the Richardson project through my firm, using Maris to access my designs. My father had invested heavily, expecting insurance payouts when the building eventually failed. My mother knew and said nothing. My sister, whether willing accomplice or unwitting pawn, was now engaged to the architect of this scheme. Only one question remained: who had sent me the mysterious text? The address led to an abandoned warehouse on Portland's industrial east side. I arrived at 11:45, parking a block away and approaching on foot. Rain had given way to steely sunshine that glinted off broken windows and graffiti-covered walls. The warehouse's loading dock door stood ajar. I hesitated, then slipped inside, my footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. Rusting equipment and empty wooden pallets created a maze of shadows. Hello. My voice bounced back at me, hollow and uncertain. A figure stepped from behind a concrete pillar. You came alone. Good. I recognized him immediately, the building inspector who'd approved the Richardson revisions. Sam had sent me his photo yesterday. Kevin Morris, 54, 20 years with the city planning department before his abrupt dismissal. Morris. I kept my distance, suddenly aware of how isolated we were. You sent the text. He nodded, glancing nervously toward the door. Don't have much time. They're watching me. Who's watching? Grayson. Your father. The others. His hands trembled as he pulled a flash drive from his pocket. Everything's here. Altered specifications, falsified materials tests, payment records. Insurance fraud on a massive scale. I took the drive, its weight insignificant compared to what it represented. Why help me? Why now? Morris's laugh was bitter. Self-preservation. The Richardson East Wing is showing stress fractures 3 years ahead of schedule. When it fails, and it will, people could die. I'm not taking that fall alone. You took bribes. Yes. No excuses, just tired resignation. 28 years of honest work, then my wife gets cancer. Insurance wouldn't cover the experimental treatment. Grayson knew exactly when to approach me, exactly how much to offer. I pocketed the drive. This is evidence of criminal activity. We should go to the police. Police won't touch it. Your father has connections and Grayson's operation is protected from above. Morris's eyes darted around the warehouse. There's a reporter at the Oregonian, Rachel Chin. She's been investigating construction fraud. Take this to her. A metallic clang echoed from somewhere in the building. Morris stiffened. I need to go. They can't know I was here. He turned to leave, then hesitated. Your sister, she doesn't know how deep this goes. Grayson's using her. Using her how? The gallery. It's perfect for laundering. He cut off abruptly, his expression changing to one of horror as he looked past me. I turned to see what had frightened him, but the warehouse remained empty. When I looked back, Morris was running toward a side exit. Wait. I called, but he was already gone, the door slamming behind him. I followed, bursting out into an alley just in time to see a black sedan accelerating away. Morris was nowhere in sight. My phone buzzed, a text from Lila. We need to talk. Not at the cabin. Mom knows about that. Meet me at Grandpa's old place. 7 p.m. Grandpa's old place, our grandfather's house in Forest Grove, now standing empty since his death 3 years ago. The property was in probate limbo, caught between my father's desire to sell and a cousin's legal challenge. I drove there directly, bypassing my afternoon meetings without explanation. The old Victorian sat on 3 acres outside town, its once immaculate gardens now overgrown, paint peeling from gingerbread trim. I'd spent summers here as a child, following my grandfather around as he puttered in his workshop, teaching me about wood and craft while my father pushed paper at his investment firm. Grandpa had wanted me to take over the family construction business, Carver & Sons, founded by his father in 1923. But I'd chosen design over building, breaking tradition. My father never forgave me, even as he reluctantly transitioned the company to real estate investment. The house was locked, but I knew where Grandpa kept the spare key, inside a false rock by the back porch. Something's never changed. Inside, dust covers draped the furniture. casting ghostly silhouettes in the fading afternoon light. I wandered through empty rooms thick with childhood memories, eventually settling in Grandpa's study to wait for Lila. The roll-top desk contained stacks of paperwork, property deeds, tax records, old correspondence. Idle curiosity led me to flip through them, pausing at a folder labeled Carver & Sons, Accounting. Inside were records of company transactions dating back 5 years. Most meant little to me, but one name jumped out: Theodore Graves, listed as a special consultant on 3 projects, all predating my divorce. Theo had been working with my father for years. Further digging uncovered correspondence between them, formal at first, then increasingly familiar. They'd planned something called Operation Cornerstone, with cryptic references to the architect and necessary sacrifices. They'd been talking about me. About Maris. My hands shook as realization hit. My father and Theo had orchestrated my divorce, deliberately using Maris to gain access to my designs. To what end? The Richardson project was significant, but worth destroying a marriage? A floorboard creaked behind me. "Hello, son." I turned to find my father standing in the doorway, not Lila. Henry Carver, 65, silver-haired and immaculate in a charcoal suit, regarding me with cold calculation. "Dad." I closed the folder too late. "Where's Lila?" "Lila isn't coming." He stepped into the room, glancing at the papers in my hand. "I see you've been doing some reading. Operation Cornerstone." I met his gaze steadily. "You and Theo planned this years ago. Necessary business. No denial, not even the pretense of shame. You chose your path, Elias. I chose mine. By destroying my marriage? My career? Collateral damage." He moved toward the desk, hand extended. "The flash drive, please." "How did you know?" I asked, making no move to surrender the flash drive. My father smiled thinly. "Lila's phone. You think she'd contact you without telling us?" He extended his hand again. "The drive, Elias. Don't make this difficult." I slipped it into my pocket. "No." Something dangerous flickered in his eyes, a coldness I'd glimpsed throughout childhood but never fully acknowledged. "You don't understand what you're involved in." "I understand enough. You and Theo conspired to compromise my designs, bribe officials, and defraud insurance companies. You used my wife to do it." Maris was eager to help. He moved toward the liquor cabinet, uncorking a dusty bottle of scotch, my grandfather's favorite. "Your marriage was already failing. She saw an opportunity. An opportunity you created." Rage burned through me, but I kept my voice level. "Was it worth it, Dad? Destroying your son's life for what? Money? You're already rich." He poured 2 fingers of amber liquid, not offering me any. "This was never about money. It was about legacy. About the company you abandoned." "I didn't abandon anything. I chose a different path. You rejected 5 generations of Carver builders to draw pretty pictures." He downed the scotch in one swallow. "Your grandfather built things, Elias. Real things that stood the test of time. Your great-grandfather before him. When you chose architecture over construction, you spat on that legacy. So this is revenge? Punishing me for not joining the family business? Reclamation." He set the glass down with careful precision. "The Richardson project should have been Carver & Sons. Instead, your firm won the contract with your fancy sustainable designs. Designs that, coincidentally, could be modified to cut costs while appearing to meet specifications. The pieces clicked together. You couldn't beat me fairly, so you corrupted my work from the inside." "Business," he said dismissively. "Nothing personal. You used my wife to betray me. You're using my sister now. That's not personal?" A new voice spoke from the doorway. "It's extremely personal, actually." Theo Grayson, or rather Theodore Graves, stepped into the study, rain-damp and immaculate in a tailored blazer. Behind him lurked a thick-necked man I didn't recognize, clearly security. "Elias." Theo nodded as if we were meeting at a cocktail party. "You've been busy." "Not busy enough, apparently." I glanced between them. "Where's Morris?" Something passed between Theo and my father, a look I couldn't interpret. "Kevin won't be speaking to anyone," Theo said smoothly. "Unfortunate accident on his way home." Horror washed through me. "You killed him?" "I did nothing of the sort." The poor man was distraught over his professional disgrace. Driving recklessly in the rain. He shrugged. "These things happen." The same phrase Maris had used when confessing her affair. "These things happen." As if death, betrayal, and corruption were simply weather patterns, beyond human agency or responsibility. "You won't get away with this." My voice sounded hollow even to my own ears. The flash drive will be in our possession momentarily, Theo finished, gesturing to the security man who started toward me. I backed against the desk. There are copies. Information sent to multiple sources. A bluff, but it gave them pause. Theo studied me with something like admiration. You know, Henry, your son has more backbone than I expected. Maris always painted him as passive, absorbed in his work. Don't talk about her, I snapped. Where is she now? Still doing your dirty work? Maris served her purpose. Theo straightened his cuffs, an unconscious tell of discomfort. She's in Vancouver now. New name, new life, generous compensation for her cooperation. And Lila? Does she know what you've done? What you're planning? A flicker of genuine emotion crossed his face. Lila is complicated. My father interrupted impatiently. Enough talk. The drive, Elias. Now. Or what? You'll have your thug hurt me? Your own son? Don't be dramatic. He sighed, suddenly looking older, tired. No one wants violence. We're offering you a way out. The drive, a signed NDA, and you walk away. Clean slate. You can leave Portland, start fresh somewhere new. I'll even fund it, $2 million. Generous, considering. Considering I'm your son? I laughed bitterly. What about the Richardson building? It's already failing. People could die when it collapses. We've taken precautions, Theo interjected. The building will be discovered to have structural issues next month. Evacuated, then carefully demolished. Insurance pays, investors recoup, no one gets hurt. Except my reputation. My career. Unfortunate collateral damage, my father said, echoing his earlier sentiment. But you'll be financially secure. I looked between them, my father, who had orchestrated my personal destruction out of wounded pride, and Theo, the skilled manipulator who had seduced both my wife and sister to advance their scheme. And if I refuse? If I take this evidence public? Theo smiled thinly. Then things become unpleasant. For everyone. Including Lila. The threat hung in the air between us. You'd hurt her to protect yourself? I asked. Your own fiancé? Something like regret flickered across his face. I wouldn't. But there are others involved who lack my personal attachments. He's not bluffing, my father added quietly. This is bigger than you understand, son. I thought of Lila, difficult, complicated, resentful, but still my sister. Still the little girl who had followed me through these very rooms, demanding to be included in every game. I want to talk to her, I said finally. Before I decide anything. Theo and my father exchanged glances. That can be arranged, Theo said carefully. Tomorrow. For now, the drive stays with us. I felt the weight of it in my pocket, the evidence that could bring down their scheme, and potentially endanger my sister. Fine. I placed the flash drive on the desk, watching as Theo pocketed it with barely concealed relief. Tomorrow then. As they moved toward the door, Theo paused. For what it's worth, Elias, I do care for Lila. That part isn't an act. I met his gaze steadily. Forgive me if I don't find that comforting. After they left, I remained in my grandfather's study, surrounded by the ghosts of a family legacy now twisted beyond recognition. Outside, the rain began again, drumming against the windows like impatient fingers. What none of them knew was that the flash drive I'd surrendered wasn't the original. That remained hidden in the one place they'd never think to look, inside the repaired case of my grandfather's pocket watch. The Portland Police Bureau's downtown precinct hummed with fluorescent-lit activity even at 9 in the evening. I sat on an uncomfortable plastic chair, waiting, my grandfather's pocket watch heavy in my palm. The original flash drive remained hidden inside its repaired case, a perfect hiding place for something so vital. Mr. Carver? I looked up to see a woman in her early 40s, dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, skepticism etched across her face. No uniform, but the badge clipped to her belt identified her as Detective Nora Quinn. Thank you for seeing me, I said, rising to shake her hand. Her grip was firm, assessing. You mentioned construction fraud and potential public safety issues. That gets my attention. But I should warn you, if this is some personal vendetta or divorce fallout, I don't have time. It's more than that. I glanced around the bustling room. Is there somewhere private we can talk? She led me to a small interview room, sparse and utilitarian. No two-way mirror, just a metal table, 3 chairs, and the faint smell of coffee and disinfectant. 20 minutes, she said, setting a digital recorder on the table. Convince me. I took a deep breath and laid out everything, The altered blueprints, the bribed inspector, my father's and Theo's involvement, Morris's suspicious accident. I opened the watch case and handed her the flash drive. Everything's here. Falsified materials tests, structural modifications, payoff records. The Richardson building is compromised. When it fails, people could die. Detective Quinn plugged the drive into her laptop, scanning the files with a practiced eye. Her expression remained neutral, but I noted the slight tightening around her mouth as she absorbed the evidence. This is comprehensive, she admitted finally, but also complicated. Your father has significant influence in this city, Mr. Carver. Theo Grayson too. Graves, I corrected. Theodore Graves. His real name. He changed it after a similar scheme in Boston 15 years ago. She made a note. That I can verify easily enough. She studied me, her gaze penetrating. Why come to me? Why not go to the press? I'm going to both. But the press can expose them, you can stop them. I leaned forward. They're planning to discover the structural issues next month, evacuate and demolish the building before it can fail catastrophically. They'll collect insurance, cover their tracks. And what do you want from this? Her tone remained skeptical. Revenge for your wife's affair? I hadn't anticipated the question and my hesitation was telling. Partly, I admitted. I'd be lying if I said this wasn't personal. But mostly, I can't live with people getting hurt because of my designs. Those blueprints have my name on them. Corrupted or not, they're my responsibility. Something in my answer seemed to satisfy her. She nodded once, decisively. I need time to verify all this. And jurisdiction is complicated. Construction fraud crosses into federal territory. She closed her laptop. Don't go to the press yet. Give me 48 hours to build a case we can actually prosecute. I don't have 48 hours. They expect me to sign an NDA tomorrow. If I don't show, they'll know something's wrong. Detective Quinn considered this. Then go. Sign nothing but play along. Record everything if you can. They'll search me. Probably. She reached into her desk drawer and extracted what looked like an ordinary pen. This records audio. Not admissible in court without a warrant, but it'll give us intelligence. I took the pen, suddenly understanding how deep I was wading. They mentioned others involved. Said it was bigger than I understand. Construction fraud usually involves networks, not individuals. Inspectors, suppliers, officials. She hesitated. You should know, your sister's gallery has been on our radar for months. Suspected money laundering. The revelation hit like a physical blow. Lila? You think she's knowingly involved? Unknown. But the gallery's financial patterns raised flags. Too much cash flowing through too quickly for a mid-tier art space. Her expression softened slightly. For what it's worth, my gut says she might be unwitting. The financial structures are sophisticated, likely beyond her expertise. I absorbed this, remembering Theo's complicated expression when I'd mentioned Lila. Is she in danger? From Theo or these others? If she knows too much? Possibly. Quinn stood, signaling our time was ending. Be careful tomorrow. These people have already eliminated one potential witness. Morris's accident, you believe it was deliberate? Single vehicle crash, no witnesses, a man with valuable testimony against powerful people? I'm certainly suspicious. She handed me her card. My direct line. Call before and after your meeting. If I don't hear from you within 2 hours of the scheduled time, I'll assume the worst. The reality of my situation settled over me like a physical weight. You think they might? I think people with millions at stake and a demonstrated willingness to endanger lives won't hesitate to remove obstacles. She walked me toward the exit. One more thing. The reporter you mentioned, Rachel Chen at the Oregonian? She's solid. If things go sideways, get the evidence to her. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving Portland's streets slick and gleaming under streetlights. I checked my phone to find 3 missed calls from Lila and a text from an unknown number, an address and time for tomorrow's meeting. No mention of my sister. As I walked to my car, I felt the weight of the recording pen in my pocket, alongside my grandfather's watch. Tools of truth against a lifetime of lies. For the first time since receiving my sister's wedding invitation, I felt something like hope, thin and fragile, but present. My phone buzzed with an incoming call. Maris's name flashed on the screen. After all this time, my ex-wife was reaching out. I answered. Elias. Maris's voice was the same, soft, slightly husky, with that hint of New England still coloring her vowels. I wasn't sure you'd answer. I stood in the rain-washed parking lot, stunned into silence by the familiar sound of her voice. After everything, the betrayals and lies, part of me still responded to it. "I need your help," she continued, filling my silence. "I'm in trouble." I laughed bitterly. "You're in trouble? That's rich. Last I heard, you were living comfortably in Vancouver with a new identity and 2 million reasons to forget my name. It's not what you think." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I can't talk long. They're watching me." "They? You mean my father and your lover? Or should I call him your handler? Please, Elias." The desperation in her voice sounded genuine. "I made terrible mistakes, I know that. But I never wanted anyone to get hurt. Not physically. When they told me what they did to Morris." I tightened my grip on the phone. "What about him?" "It wasn't an accident. She broke off, her breath quickening. "I can't do this over the phone. I have information, documents that could help you. Tomorrow night, the gallery opening at Lila's. I'll be there." "Maris, if this is another trap." "I deserve that," she admitted. "But I'm telling the truth. Theo's planning something at the Richardson Building, something beyond what you know. Tomorrow night. 8 o'clock. Before I could question further, she ended the call. I stood staring at my phone, torn between old instincts to trust her and hard lessons about her capacity for deception. After a moment, I called Detective Quinn and relayed the conversation. "Could be legitimate," she said cautiously. "Could also be bait. Either way, we need to move up our timeline. I'll have officers watching the Richardson Building tomorrow night. And the gallery opening? I'll be there personally. Undercover." She paused. "Your meeting with your father and Grayson is still at noon?" "Yes." "Stick to the plan. Record everything, sign nothing. I'll have the warrant ready by evening." The next morning dawned clear for the first time in days, Portland's skyline crisp against a pale blue sky. I dressed carefully, charcoal suit, white shirt, my most conservative tie. The costume of compliance. Detective Quinn's recording pen sat in my breast pocket. I tested it thoroughly, confirming it worked even through fabric. My grandfather's watch, now emptied of its secret contents, ticked steadily on my wrist, a reminder of legacy, of things built to last. The meeting location was a private dining room at the Arlington Club, Portland's oldest establishment. My father's sanctuary, where 3 generations of Carver men had made deals over rare steaks and expensive scotch. Security was visible but discreet, 2 men at the entrance, another by the elevators. They patted me down efficiently, finding nothing suspicious in a pen or a watch. My father and Theo waited in a wood-paneled room with a long table and city views. A lawyer I recognized from my parents' estate planning sat with them, documents spread before him. "Elias." My father nodded without warmth. "You've made the right choice." "Have I?" I took a seat across from them. "That remains to be seen." Theo pushed a stack of papers toward me. "Standard non-disclosure agreement. In exchange for your silence regarding certain business practices, you receive $2 million in relocation assistance." I scanned the documents, playing for time, letting the pen record. "This says I acknowledge professional misconduct. That I knew about and approved the structural changes." "A necessary formality," the lawyer interjected smoothly. "Should questions arise, it protects everyone involved. By making me the scapegoat." My father sighed. "You're getting $2 million to disappear, Elias. Most scapegoats don't fare nearly so well." I turned to Theo. "And Lila? What happens to her after the wedding? After you've used her gallery for whatever money laundering scheme you're running?" His expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Your sister isn't your concern anymore." "She's my only concern." I leaned forward. "I want her left out of this. Whatever happens with me, Lila stays clean." Something like respect flickered in Theo's eyes. "That can be arranged." "I want it in writing." My father slapped the table impatiently. "Enough games. Sign the papers, take the money and go. This ends today." I pretended to consider, then picked up a pen, not Quinn's but one from the table. "One more thing. The Richardson Building. Your plan to discover structural issues. When exactly is that happening?" Theo and my father exchanged glances. "Why does it matter?" Theo asked carefully. "Because unlike you, I care if people get hurt." My father scoffed. "Always the idealist. The issues will be discovered during a routine inspection next week. The building evacuated, then demolished. No one gets hurt, insurance pays, everyone wins. Everyone except me." "You made your choice years ago," my father replied coldly. "When you turned your back on the family business." I held his gaze, searching for any flicker of paternal feeling, finding none. Yes, I did. With deliberate slowness, I signed the documents, watching relief wash over both men's faces. The lawyer gathered the papers, nodding with professional satisfaction. Congratulations, gentlemen. This matter is concluded. He rose, shaking hands with my father and Theo before exiting. Left alone with my betrayers, I stood. The money? Already transferred. My father pushed a bank document across the table. Accessible immediately. I suggest you use some of it to book a flight. Today. That eager to be rid of me? That eager to move forward, Theo corrected. You've been paid for your silence, Elias. Don't test our patience. I took the bank document, folded it carefully, and placed it in my pocket alongside Quinn's recording pen. One last question. Was any of it real? My marriage? Your feelings for my sister? My father looked away, but Theo held my gaze. Maris never loved you, he said flatly. But Lila, that's different. I nodded, absorbing the final blow. I'll be seeing you both sooner than you think. As I walked out into the spring sunshine, I touched my pocket where the recording pen captured everything. Tonight at the gallery opening, it would all come to a head. Behind me, I felt my father and Theo watching, believing they had won. They had no idea what was coming. Lila's gallery occupied a renovated warehouse in Portland's Pearl District, its industrial bones softened by track lighting and white walls. By 8 that evening, the opening was in full swing. Art world personalities in calculated casual wear, servers circulating with champagne, the low murmur of appreciation and criticism flowing around abstract sculptures. I stood near the entrance, scanning faces. Detective Quinn was already inside, posing as a collector in a simple black dress, her badge and gun concealed. 2 uniformed officers waited in an unmarked car outside. Another team watched the Richardson building across town. Everything was in place. Now I just needed Maris to appear with her promised evidence. You actually came. Lila's voice came from behind me. My sister looked elegant but tense, her eyes darting around the crowded room. I didn't think you would. And miss your big night? I kept my tone light, aware of potential listeners. I signed the papers, Lila. It's done. Relief washed over her face, though something like disappointment shadowed her eyes. So you're leaving Portland? That's the plan. I studied her carefully. Unless there's a reason I should stay? She hesitated, conflict evident in her expression. Eli, there you are. Theo appeared, sliding a possessive arm around Lila's waist. Elias, didn't expect to see you here. Just offering congratulations before I go. I raised my champagne glass. To new beginnings. Theo's smile didn't reach his eyes. Indeed. When's your flight? Tomorrow morning. The lie came easily. San Francisco first, then, well, best you don't know. He nodded, satisfied with my apparent compliance. Wise choice. If you'll excuse us, the gallery director needs Lila. As they moved away, Lila glanced back, something urgent in her gaze. I gave a slight nod, hoping she understood I wasn't abandoning her. I circulated through the gallery, noting surveillance cameras, exits, the handful of men who didn't quite fit the art crowd, security undoubtedly. My father hadn't arrived yet, but I spotted his driver outside. At 8:15 my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Service entrance. No. I slipped away from the main gallery, following a corridor past restrooms toward the loading dock. The service area was dimly lit and smelled of cardboard and paint. Maris waited in the shadows, nearly unrecognizable with her hair cut short and dyed dark brown. She startled when I appeared, eyes wide with a fear that seemed genuine. You came. She sounded surprised, vulnerable. I came, I confirmed, maintaining distance, remembering Detective Quinn's warning about traps. You said you had information. She glanced nervously toward the door. They're planning to trigger the collapse tonight. Not a controlled demolition next week. A catastrophic failure that looks like an accident. That's insane. People work in that building. Cleaning crews, security. Minimal casualties they can write off. Her voice shook. Your father's insurance policy has a terrorism exclusion. If it's an accident, they collect triple. And if it looks like terrorism? They've arranged a patsy. Some environmental extremist with a history of protesting development. She withdrew an envelope from her jacket. Here's everything. The revised timeline, the contact who planted the explosives, account numbers. Enough to stop them if you hurry. I reached for the envelope but hesitated. Why, Maris? Why help me now? Pain and regret crossed her face. I deserved your suspicion. I betrayed you repeatedly. I justified it, told myself you were distant, absorbed in your work, that we were already broken. That doesn't answer my question. She looked away. Morris was my friend. We grew close during everything. When they killed him, her voice broke. I realized there were lines I couldn't cross even for money. Even for freedom from a marriage that was suffocating me. I studied her, searching for deception, finding instead a complex mixture of guilt, fear, and determination that rang true. They'll know you helped me. I've made arrangements. She pressed the envelope into my hands. But you need to go. Now, call whoever you're working with. I pulled out my phone, dialing Quinn. As it rang, the service door burst open, flooding the area with light. My father stood framed in the doorway, 2 security men behind him. I'm disappointed, Elias. We had an agreement. Maris stepped in front of me protectively. Henry, don't do this. Maris. My father's voice held genuine surprise. You too? After everything we did for you? You killed Morris, she accused. That wasn't part of the deal. Business necessities. His gaze hardened as he turned to me. The envelope, Elias. It's too late, I replied, hearing Quinn pick up on the other end of the still-connected call. The police already know about the explosives at Richardson. They're securing the building now. My father's expression didn't change, but something cold and calculating entered his eyes. Unfortunate. For all of us. He nodded to the security men who moved forward with grim purpose. What happened next unfolded in chaotic fragments. Maris shoving me toward a side exit. The sound of a gunshot. Detective Quinn's voice shouting from my phone. The service door slamming open again as police officers flooded in, weapons drawn. Amid the chaos, I saw my father being handcuffed, his face a mask of cold fury. Theo appeared in the corridor, hands raised, his eyes searching not for escape but for Lila. And Maris. Maris lay crumpled on the concrete floor, red blooming across her white blouse where she had intercepted the bullet meant for me. Elias, she whispered as I knelt beside her, pressing my hands against the wound. I'm sorry, for everything. Behind us, the gallery erupted in shouts and confusion as the truth unraveled at last. The hospital waiting room was a liminal space of harsh fluorescent lighting and uncomfortable chairs. I sat alone, my hands still stained with Maris's blood despite my attempts to wash them clean. The clock on the wall read 2:15 in the morning. 6 hours since the chaos at the gallery, 5 since Maris had been rushed into emergency surgery. Detective Quinn entered, carrying 2 paper cups of coffee. She'd removed her undercover dress, now wearing department-issued sweats, her badge visible on her belt. Any news? She asked, handing me a cup. I shook my head. Still in surgery. She sat beside me, her exhaustion evident. The Richardson building is secure. Bomb squad found 7 explosive devices, professionally placed at key structural points. They've been neutralized. And the patsy they plan to blame? Alexander Jenkins, environmental activist. We picked him up at his apartment, completely unaware he was about to be framed for terrorism. They had his DNA at the scene, planted materials in his home. She sipped her coffee. Your father's security men are talking already, hoping for deals. It's unraveling fast. My father? Silent. Lawyered up immediately. She hesitated. Grayson's been more cooperative. Theo? I couldn't hide my surprise. Says he'll provide evidence against the entire network in exchange for consideration during sentencing. And she gave me a measured look. Protection for your sister. Lila. In the chaos I'd almost forgotten. Where is she? At the station. Not under arrest but answering questions. I think she genuinely didn't know about the explosives, though she suspected the money laundering. Quinn's expression softened slightly. She's been asking for you. A doctor appeared in the doorway, surgical mask pulled down, eyes tired but calm. Mr. Carver? Your wife is stable. The bullet missed her vital organs, but she lost a significant amount of blood. The next 24 hours will be critical. Ex-wife, I corrected automatically, then felt immediately petty. Can I see her? Briefly. She's still heavily sedated. I followed him through sterile corridors to the ICU. Maris lay pale and small against white sheets, tubes and monitors surrounding her like some modernist art installation. Her newly dark hair framed a face I had once known better than my own. I'll give you a moment, the doctor said, withdrawing. Alone with her, I struggled to reconcile my conflicting emotions. This woman had betrayed me repeatedly, helped destroy my career, my reputation. Yet she had also stepped in front of a bullet meant for me, provided evidence that saved lives. "You're thinking too loud," Maris whispered, her eyes fluttering open. "Always were." "You should rest," I said, moving closer to her bedside. "Did they stop it? The building?" "Yes. Everyone's safe." Relief washed over her face. "Good." Her fingers weakly sought mine. "I didn't know, Eli. About the explosives. I swear. When I found out, I couldn't let it happen." "I believe you," I said, surprised to find it was true. "There's something else." Her voice was fading, the medication pulling her back toward unconsciousness. "Lila, she didn't know either. She loved you, always. Just jealous." "Rest now," I said, gently withdrawing my hand. "We'll talk later." She was already asleep. Outside her room, Detective Quinn waited. "We need to get to the station. Your sister's statement is critical and they're processing Graves now." The Portland police station was a hive of activity despite the late hour. Officers and agents from multiple agencies coordinated as the scale of the conspiracy became clear. Not just the Richardson Building but half a dozen other projects across the Pacific Northwest, a complex web of fraud, bribery, and money laundering stretching back years. Lila sat in an interview room looking small and lost. When I entered, she leapt up, throwing her arms around me with a desperation that caught me off guard. "I thought you were dead," she sobbed into my shoulder. "When I heard the gunshot." "I'm okay," I said, awkwardly patting her back. "It was Maris who was hit. She's stable." Lila pulled back, her face streaked with tears and mascara. "I didn't know, Eli. I swear I didn't know what they were planning." "The gallery?" I suspected something wasn't right with the finances, but Theo kept saying it was normal for the art world. "What about before? With Maris?" She looked away, guilt evident. "I knew they were seeing each other. I was angry at you, for always being the perfect one, the successful one. When Theo started paying attention to me." She trailed off, ashamed. "It felt good to take something from you for once. The admission hurt, but less than I expected. And now I'm probably going to jail." She laughed bitterly. "Money laundering carries a 5-year sentence. Minimum. Detective Quinn thinks you might avoid charges if you cooperate fully." Hope flickered across her face. "Really?" Before I could answer, the door opened. Quinn stood with another officer I didn't recognize. "Miss Carver, we need your formal statement now." She glanced at me. "Mr. Carver, Theodore Graves is asking to speak with you before his transfer." I was led to another interview room where Theo sat handcuffed to a table, his usual polish gone, exhaustion evident in every line of his face. "Elias." He nodded as I entered. "I wasn't sure you'd come. What do you want, Theo?" "To explain." "Not excuse, explain." He straightened slightly. "Your father approached me 3 years ago. He recognized me from Boston, knew my history. Instead of exposing me, he offered a partnership. Using me as your unwitting accomplice." I remained standing, refusing the offered chair. "Initially, yes. Using your designs, your reputation." He had the grace to look ashamed. "Maris was easy to recruit, ambitious, chafing against what she saw as the constraints of your marriage." "And Lila?" Something genuinely painful crossed his face. "That wasn't planned. I met her at your anniversary party. She was different. Passionate about art, desperate to emerge from your shadow. You used her too." "At first," he admitted. "But it became real. I love her, Elias. As much as someone like me can love anyone." I studied him, searching for deception, finding instead a complex mixture of regret and resignation. "I've made a full confession," he continued. "Named everyone involved in exchange for one thing, leniency for Lila. She didn't know about the fraud, the explosives. The gallery laundering, yes, eventually, but nothing more." "Why would you do that? Sacrifice yourself?" Theo looked away, the handcuffs jangling as he shifted. "Perhaps I'm finally building something that will last." 6 months later, Portland emerged from winter into a tentative spring. I stood at the observation deck of the newly completed Riverside Tower, my first major project since the Richardson scandal broke. Below, the Willamette River caught the morning light, while across the water, cranes marked the site where the Richardson building was being rebuilt, this time with oversight from 3 independent inspection firms. The door opened behind me. Rachel Chin from the Oregonian joined me at the railing, notebook in hand for our scheduled interview. "Quite a view," she remarked. "How does it feel, seeing your design actually built as intended?" "Vindication," I admitted. "But also responsibility. Every beam, every joint, they're all carrying the weight of what happened." Rachel had broken the story that rocked Portland's construction and real estate world. Her exposé revealed not just the Richardson fraud but a decade-long pattern of corruption that had compromised buildings across the Pacific Northwest. The resulting investigation had led to 37 arrests, including building officials, inspectors, and developers. "Your father's sentencing is tomorrow," she said, her tone carefully neutral. "Will you attend?" I watched a ferry crossing the river, sunlight flashing off its windows. Yes. Not for him, for me. For closure. My father had maintained his silence throughout his trial, never expressing remorse or offering explanation. The jury had taken just 4 hours to find him guilty on all counts. He faced up to 30 years. And Theo Graves? Any contact since his plea deal? No. I turned from the view. But he kept his word. His testimony brought down the entire network, and Lila received immunity. My sister had avoided criminal charges but lost her gallery. She was in Seattle now, working at a small museum, rebuilding her life piece by piece. Our relationship remained a work in progress. Monthly phone calls, tentative steps toward forgiveness on both sides. "What about your ex-wife?" "I understand she's recovered from her injuries." "Physically, yes." I thought of Maris, who had moved to California after testifying against my father. Her last email mentioned teaching yoga, finding peace. Some wounds take longer to heal. Rachel closed her notebook. "Off the record, how are you really doing, Elias? This past year cost you everything." I considered her question carefully. Not everything. I lost my marriage, family relationships, professional reputation, but I found something else. Clarity. Purpose. After the Richardson scandal, I'd faced professional ruin. Then Detective Quinn connected me with a nonprofit that retrofitted buildings in low-income areas to improve safety. I'd volunteered my expertise, eventually becoming their lead consultant. The Riverside Tower was my first commercial project since, designed with unprecedented safety margins and transparency. "Your grandfather's watch," Rachel noted, gesturing to my wrist. "You still wear it?" I glanced down at the timepiece that had carried such crucial evidence, its repaired case now a symbol of my own reconstruction. Some things are worth fixing no matter how broken they seem. Our interview concluded, I headed to my final appointment of the day, coffee with Detective Quinn, now a monthly tradition. She waited at our usual corner table, 2 cups already steaming between us. "How'd the interview go?" she asked as I sat. "Better than the first one, when all they wanted to talk about was my father's betrayal and my shattered marriage." I sipped the coffee she'd ordered, black, no sugar, exactly as I preferred. She'd become a good friend over the months. This time we actually discussed architecture. Progress. She smiled. "Are you ready for tomorrow?" "As ready as I'll ever be." I met her gaze. "Will you still come with me?" "Of course. That's what friends do." Later, I walked alone through Washington Park as the sun set, casting long shadows across the rose gardens. 6 months of testimony, evidence review, and legal proceedings had drained me, but the weight that had pressed on my chest since receiving Lila's wedding invitation had finally lifted. My phone buzzed with a text from a familiar number. Theo, breaking his silence for the first time since his sentencing to 12 years. "She asks about you. Still loves her brother. Some bonds can't be broken. Even by men like me." I stared at the message, a complex mixture of emotions washing through me. After everything, family remained, damaged, complicated, but present. Lila and I might never recapture the closeness of our childhood, but the connection remained, like a structure built to withstand even the most catastrophic forces. At home, I paused before my drafting table, studying the preliminary sketches for my next project. A community center in the neighborhood where my grandfather had built his first house. In the corner of the blueprint, I'd written his favorite motto: "Build once, build right, build to last." I opened my grandfather's watch case, now empty of secrets but filled with possibility. Inside the lid, barely visible unless you knew to look, I'd engraved a simple addition to his wisdom: "And when necessary, build again." Outside, Portland's lights twinkled against the darkening sky. Not the same city I'd known before betrayal had rewritten my understanding of family and trust. But my city still. My home. The place where I'd lost everything and somehow found my way back to what mattered. Tomorrow would bring my father's sentencing, another milestone on this journey of reckoning and rebuilding. But tonight belonged to quiet reflection, to acknowledging how far I'd come from that rainy March afternoon when a cream-colored envelope had arrived on my kitchen counter, changing everything. I closed the watch with a gentle click, its steady ticking a reminder that time moves forward, regardless of our wounds or wishes. And sometimes, if we're fortunate, It carries us toward healing.